Welcome to The Journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of The Journey. And this is Suicide Awareness Month. And some of the guests that we have on this particular month is a little bit different than we've done before. A lot of times we have stories of individuals who come on, talk about their personal stories of transformation. This particular month, we wanted to feature a couple different programs that are happening within specifically the Rockford state line area of how they're helping to make some differences in our youth's life. Last week we had Elliot Gannett on the show, and now we have his business partner Nick. I just lost your last name, Nick. I've just go ahead and say your last name, Nick.
Yeah, Votava. Nick
Votava.
Yep.
Votava. Okay, thank you. And so Nick, tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what do you do when you have an opportunity to have fun? What does Nick do to have fun?
All right. So I run Rockford Barbell. I'm obviously a big part of Rockford Barbell. And personally, I enjoy lifting weights. I enjoy, kind of all forms of exercise. Additionally, I like going outside, do a lot of camping in the summer months, like to travel. So recently I started trying to do the highest point of each state. So trying to I've done all the Midwest, and I just recently went out to Utah and climbed the mountain out there. So yeah, traveling, outdoors, fitness, kind of what I like to do for fun.
Nice. Well, how many states have you checked off your list so far?
So I started this journey a couple years ago. I've done 10 states so far.
Okay.
So most of the Midwest, and then just recently this summer did Nebraska and Utah's.
Gotcha. And so when like obviously when we think of out west, we think of, in Colorado you have the Rocky Mountain National Park, you got the different mountains that are connected to the Rockies. Illinois, what's the highest point in Illinois and where is that?
Yeah, so the highest point in Illinois is called Charles Mound. It's the very northwest tip of Illinois, so north of Galena, maybe just as far as you can go. You can see Wisconsin border and Iowa from the highest point in Illinois.
Nice. Okay. And then and Wisconsin's highest point probably is it close to there, or is it
So
farther north?
Wisconsin's right in the middle of the state. It's about 4.5 hours from Rockford, just straight up. It's called Tim's Hill.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Interesting. So
Yeah.
was there anything in particular that drove you to want to accomplish that?
Just prioritizing travel a bit more, seeing some sites I hadn't seen before. I think a lot of times we want to travel to those cities or to the more, I don't know, beautiful places. But I think exploring what's around us and exploring the Midwest and seeing these different areas has just been a fun thing to try and do.
Perfect. Well, let me are you from the Rockford area?
I am. Yep. I was born and raised here. I went to school in the Rockford Lutheran schools. And then I went on to college at the University of Iowa. So I studied art and psychology while I was there. Spent my 4 years there. And then I moved back to Rockford and started working here.
Gotcha. And so, yeah, so tell us a little bit about, number one, how did you get into fitness and weightlifting? How'd that all come about? And what have you done with that, you personally? And then how did you get into social work and psychology?
Yeah. So growing up, I was involved in sports. I really liked the competitive aspect. I participated in football, wrestling, and track. So I did all 3 seasons and was always pretty heavily involved in sports. Being that I was from Lutheran, I went to Iowa. It was a pretty big transition. I knew I had an experience of kind of small Lutheran schools, but then I knew I wanted something different for college, kind of a bigger scene. So I knew I wasn't going to do competitive sports when I went to college, but I still maintained a level of fitness. But it wasn't until after college that I realized the place that fitness really had in my life. So wrestling was my primary sport in high school, and I think I got a taste of what real training is, and what it did for me mentally, as well as physically. And then once I moved back, I realized, I really need to take fitness more seriously. And this is really an important thing that has helped me personally. So I started getting more into it when I had moved back to Rockford. So I started with CrossFit and doing kind of competing in that a little bit. But that was my journey into discovering weightlifting, specifically Olympic style weightlifting, which I've now done for the last, I don't know, 7 years.
Gotcha. And then yeah, having a psychology and art background at Iowa. Tell us a little bit about that, because that's kind of a that dips right into like a lot of my family. So that's why I'm
Yeah.
curious about that. So
Yeah, so I went to college really not really knowing what I wanted to do, but I knew I had enjoyed art and I wanted to pursue that. And then I started, I was taking art classes, primarily painting, some printmaking, sculpture classes. But then I started picking up these psychology classes one by one. Eventually thought I was going to get a minor, and then that turned into being another major. Really enjoying those classes, kind of learning about myself and my thoughts, as well as extending to how people in general process things and think and move about the world. So yeah, I studied both. I think they both kind of complemented each other. A lot of my art was kind of psychology based. I did a lot of like pattern making and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was an interesting kind of dual pursuit during that time.
gotcha. And then you went on to get your master's, and that was in social work, correct?
Yes, correct. So yeah, 4 or 5 years ago, I went back and got my master's in social work, originally thinking that I would be a school social worker. I'd worked in schools kind of throughout my time back in Rockford. I started my career back here as a truancy worker. I did that for about 5 years, kind of going home to home and talking to parents about school attendance and the importance of education. And I did a couple other programs through Youth Services Network that were all community based. And that was something that I wanted to continue further, specifically social work and meeting people kind of where they are within the community, and trying to support in the best ways we can.
Gotcha. And so once you get your MSW, where'd that lead you to go?
Yeah, so I was a school social worker in the Harlem School District for 3 years. And simultaneously, Elliot and I had started Rockford Barbell kind of during that time. So yeah, post masters, was working there full time, while also volunteering here at Rockford Barbell. So kind of building those two things kind of simultaneously. And COVID happened during that school time, so that was it was a challenge,
Mhm.
the school years.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. And it's still, even though we're back into the schools now, and there's not much remote learning at all, it is still the challenge now is recovering from the impact of the quarantining, of the remote learning, of just all aspects of the pandemic. So uh, so why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about Rockford Barbell now, and tell us about, what's the vision of Rockford Barbell? I know Elliot explained a little bit about it last week. I know that it definitely started off as a grassroots aspect of it, and now it's kind of evolved with some grant money coming in. So yeah, tell us a little bit about it from your perspective of how it got started and the vision of it and where it's
Yeah.
at the moment.
Yeah, so we were transitioning to a new gym. We knew we wanted a weightlifting gym. It was Elliot and I and a group of teachers that all kind of started Rockford Barbell. We probably had 5 or 6 educators that kind of had this idea of having a weightlifting gym, and then bringing kids in to allow them to learn and allow them to get into something that we've all felt has benefited us so much. We know that, us working within the schools, we know that schools do a lot, but are still in need of more support. So we had this idea of starting a gym and having kids be involved in our space, and it's evolved into what it is. So we started in 2019, so we've been running for about 3 years now. But like you said, it's kind of evolved over time, and as we've been able to get more community support and funding, we've been able to grow ourselves into what we have today, which is two programs. We have a weightlifting program as well as a yoga program. But this year we've really been trying to solidify our systems and our processes. And so Rockford Barbell has kind of launched its new mission, which is to improve the social and emotional well-being of youth through mindful movement and trauma-informed practices.
Okay. And when, just for the average person who's listening, mindfulness movement and trauma informed exercise, creating a trauma informed space, maybe explain a little bit about what those two things mean.
Yeah. So mindful movement, when we think of mindful movement, we think of movement that puts us in the present moment. I think is kind of the easiest way to think about it. If you're doing an activity like weightlifting, it requires full concentration in order to get the most out of yourself. So you can't think about all the things that happened in the past, and you also can't worry about those things that happen in the future. So having movement that gets us into that here and now moment is what we're promoting. We know that this is often the intention with yoga, and we're trying to spread that into highlighting that for people with weightlifting, as well as go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's interesting when you talk about that. Having been lifting weights since I was a young person. I started lifting when I was 11 years old, and everything that you just said obviously is 100% accurate, right? And when we talk about, or when I've heard educators or other types of teachers talking about the idea of mindfulness, they talk about it conceptually. And I think the hardest thing about teaching a concept like mindfulness is that if it's just in the concept form without the experience, it's much different when we are experiencing it, and then you can point out, you just did it, that was mindfulness,
right?
And so versus conceptually talking about mindfulness and then attempting to try to achieve it.
How can we expect to get someone in the present moment by just telling them to do so? It's like, it's so hard to sometimes control our thoughts and control, our emotions, our emotional responses to things, right? But if we can move a body into a more present space, things become a little bit more, our thinking becomes a little bit better, our emotional regulation is a little bit more under control. And kids witness it, and kids experience it for themselves and understand, I was able to do this. Now, what else can I do? Seeing that those improvements over time. There's a lot that we can work with kids on, using the tools of yoga and weightlifting, to impact thought and emotion.
Well, and I think the other key aspect to it, we were talking about the pandemic earlier, and when I'm teaching some of my classes, the idea of introducing the concept that we may not be able to control, or we can't control all the stressors in our life, but we can control our response, how we're managing our stress. And so it is, I think there is still a common belief that if I manage all the stressors, then I'll have a stress-free life, as if that is like a goal. And number one, I don't think it's possible. Number two, I think that is probably a pretty misguided or misdirected thought process, because number one, I don't think it's possible to remove all stressors for an extended period of time. I just don't think that's how life works. And I don't know if that's beneficial, because how do we grow and develop if we aren't pressing up against those stressors and moving through those stressors?
Right.
So I definitely think that part of it, but being able to, having a young person experience that and recognize that you just did that. I mean, like you said, in wrestling, when I remember training for wrestling, and there was time. I mean, it didn't matter what what test I had going on or whatever. When I was running, some of the conditioning drills, all I could think about was how I was feeling at the moment,
Yeah, and get
and
through this, and yeah, and your ability to push through those barriers you might be having.
yep, yep, exactly. And then you were talking about another part of the mission is trauma informed. So maybe explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, so last year I was working at Youth Services Network within they have a trauma clinic there. So I was given a lot of trainings in trauma. And Elliot and I have taken some trainings and learned, the more we learn about trauma, the more we can support it. So creating a space that's comfortable for anyone, no matter what their experiences may be, whether they've experienced significant trauma or lesser traumas. We want to create a safe space to be able to have conversations with students, for them to feel supported. Some students come in and they're overly aroused, right? They've gone through a long day. They're having a hard time just regulating their thought or their emotion. So providing a safe space where they can go outside for a minute, or they can collect themselves, and just having a level of understanding of what our kids have experienced, and providing that safety and that support for them, no matter what their experiences may have been.
Gotcha. So a big part of it is by you and Elliot and the other volunteers being aware of what's going on. That if someone's coming in, if a student's coming in and they, are either maybe hyper aroused and presenting themselves as either as angry or overly active, or maybe the opposite, right?
Right.
More melancholy or whatever, that there may be more to that story. It may not, it's more than just maybe being in a bad mood or in moody.
100%. You're right. So like you kind of mentioned, right? So there's kind of two ways you can go when it comes to stress, and when it comes to experiences. You can be hyper aroused, meaning your nervous system is up and overly active, or you can be hypo aroused, where you're kind of shut down and kind of quiet. So we can use movements that actually target these things and push people into better regulatory states. So when we see our kids, part of our warm-ups, we will use movements that either slow them down, or those kids that need to be sped up a little bit, we will use some movements to speed them up. So it's kind of cool to be able to apply some of what we've been learning into the actual movement, and hopefully get more out of our kids, and see more improvements over time.
And I think, again, being able to move from introducing a concept to students and then actually bring them through experiencing it, I think is one of the huge benefits of what you guys are doing with Rockford Barbell. And I know, as a social worker and a school social worker, and I think I mentioned this to Elliot last week, was that when I was at Harlem and I was coaching and I was working there as that school social worker, there was many times that probably the best counseling that I ever did was in the weight room or on the football field, or wherever I was at, because one, I was able to instruct them and model for them certain exercises for them to self-regulate and be self-aware, or maybe the other way around, self-aware, so they could choose different things to do to self-regulate their emotions, their mindset, and then which would then create that sense of safety or sense of belonging, which they may not be finding in other places in their life.
Right. So when we look at like trauma informed care, often, what's necessary for that process to begin is a therapeutic relationship, as well as regulation. And then we can get into talking, and we can get into like more traditional, narrative type therapies or discussions. But without the relationship, and without, the regulation piece, it's hard to communicate in productive ways with students or with adults or whoever it may be. So, what Rockford Barbell is focusing on is those relationships, as well as that self-management piece, or the regulation piece of getting people into a state where we can have, more honest and open conversations and work on that problem solving in whatever life area they may need help with.
And right now I'm doing a lot of talks at different either schools or community, with educators or with students or with different community agencies, and we talk about the incidences that lead to a person being predisposed to being in that darkness, to that suicidal mindset, right? That sense of hopelessness, and a lot of it is those ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences, or that trauma that they may experience. And again, we can talk about the statistics, and we can talk about some of these concepts, but I think what I'm most drawn to with the program that you guys are doing is that it actually is putting into action ways of bringing light into someone's darkness, bringing hope into someone's darkness, and creating those protective factors.
Right.
We know that, as I mentioned earlier, I don't believe that we can control all the risk factors. We can be aware of them, and we can attempt to address them, but I don't know if we're going to be able, to stifle or control all those risk factors. But if we have we have enough established protective factors, like those relationships, like learning how to, themselves learning how to regulate their thoughts, regulate their emotions, and the sense of that they are able to accomplish something. Those are all huge protective factors, I think. And so I appreciate what you guys are doing. So one of the questions I wanted to, and again, without using any names, and I know there's probably tons of stories, of individual students that you've seen kind of transform from who they were at the very beginning and who they are now. Any particular story pops out in your mind?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, students that have been with us for a long time, we see the most growth with students that are able to be there consistently and put forth a good effort. We see the most growth of them. But some of the things that we see is just being able to stay put in one platform. So we have 7 platforms in our space. And kids are always working together in groups. But sometimes when they come in, they may wander here and there and away from their spot. But over time, they develop more focus, and with that focus, they can maintain a little bit better relationships. They can help their partners, have back and forth about what each other need in order to be successful in what we're trying to accomplish. So the kids are always given a program, so we ask them to work together in order to get through that program. And then Elliot and I will walk around and help and make sure that is going well. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is just kids starting to get used to the program, seeing the flow, and they're more consistent, and they're better able to have relationships with the other students in our class. Yeah, it's good to watch, to see them be in more control of their bodies and their minds and their relationships, and having positive experiences within relationships. Because sometimes I think relationships, and like you were saying, like a lack of tangible things we can do to help ourselves feel better, contributes to a lot of mental illness and a lot of mental health concerns. So helping people with those relationships, and helping them manage themselves and their thoughts and emotions, it's really great. It's awesome to see these kids progress over time. I think another cool thing about our program that we see time and time again is our age range and our diversity. We have guys and girls of all ages, 10 to 18. So different opportunities for people to step up as leaders. Sometimes we'll have 10-year-olds that can show a high schooler different movements and different things, and it's not an opportunity that kids get every day, just to be a leader within a space. So having opportunities for different kids to teach other kids things, it's cool to watch.
Very, very cool. Yeah. I think those, I was just thinking about different scenarios over time when I was coaching, is that someone comes in and it looks like it'd be simple to do a back squat. It would be simple to do something like that, but for whatever reasons, the movement, they're overthinking whatever, and their heels keep coming up, and then when you break that exercise down into smaller pieces, get them familiar with the movement, what it feels like, and then all of a sudden, you know a few weeks later, they're mastering that movement, and then they remember what they did, and then they show someone else, this is how they learned how to do it.
Right.
And so it's a pretty cool experience, and their level of confidence, because they go from being intimidated by something and frustrated, to working through it, and now being able to come to a place of mastery. So
Right. Right. And it really builds, a sense of self-confidence, that we can apply to other life areas. If you can be successful, lifting these weights, what else can we be successful in? What relationships can we be more successful in? And, what school work can we be more successful in? It just allows us to build on the progress that we make within the gym.
yeah, and I think, and I know probably the same thing for you, is that it's the same formula, of being able to have a desire to accomplish something, and then being willing to learn what are the specific steps, breaking down the steps for that movement. And so it ends up becoming very similar for schoolwork or relationships, or whatever it is that may need to achieve. So Nick, I really appreciate what you and Elliot are doing. What is the best way, for if someone wanted to get a hold of you, or get in contact with, signing their student up for something like this? How do they go about doing that?
Yeah, so we have a website, rockfordbarbell.com. We have contact information for both Elliot and I, emails and phone numbers there. You can also reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook. We're on those two. But our sign up, everything is on rockfordbarbell.com. So if you're interested in signing up for either our yoga or our weightlifting programs, these programs are free for any kid 10 to 18. And yeah, all the signups are done through rockfordbarbell.com.
Perfect. Nick, I really appreciate your commitment to helping our youth, and utilizing the things that that helped you, be able to share that with other people. So thank you. No, I'm
Yes.
joking.
Yes.
So
Thank you so much for having both Elliot and I. We appreciate it, and like getting our message out, and how we can support our community, through our kids.
perfect. Um, if you have someone who may be interested in learning more about Rockford Barbell, or about what Nick or Elliot are doing, definitely reach out to rockfordbarbell.com. Um, and look over their program, make some comments, be able to encourage and spread the word. But people are at the grassroots making a difference for our youth, and making a difference for our community. As always, I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to being with you next week.